Hey everyone, welcome back. So at the time this video releases, it would have been exactly 1 year to the day since I purchased my high mileage 2003 E55 AMG. So I figured this would be a good opportunity to look back and look at everything I've done so far to this car over the past year. When I first purchased and picked up the car, it'd been sat for a very long time. It had no working air conditioning, no working ABS system, and had a very rough running engine. Unfortunately, the day I picked it up was also one of the hottest days the UK had in a while, so the 100-mile drive south was very uncomfortable. But once I limped it back home to my friend's workshop, we immediately recharged the AC system, and luckily it did not have a leak. This was what the rough condition of the engine bay looked like, and at this point the car had 207,000 miles on it. After some diagnosis, I wanted to repair the ABS system first due to safety critical components. This was found to be a simple case of the rear right ABS ring had rusted away and disintegrated. So a day in the workshop was all that was needed to exchange the ring for a new one. After this, the ABS system was happy, so I could next tackle the rough-running engine. This seemed to have resolved itself after a couple of days of driving. I think that this car had sat for so long that some of the solenoids in the engine were likely a little bit stiff and were not actuating properly. We also found that there was a small hole in the exhaust where it looked like the car had collided with something, so that was a very easy patch to repair. Over the next few weeks, I started to clean up the engine bay, painting some of the engine components to hopefully try to restore the engine's look. I also then cleaned and polished the headlights on the car to make them look a lot shinier. At this point the engine bay is looking a lot cleaner, but it's not perfect, but I'll touch on this later. Next, I replaced the supercharger's intercooler pump. It's fair to say that the old pump wasn't really functional anymore, and yes, this is how it came out of the car, completely disintegrated. After a few weeks of driving, I started to get aromatic failure warnings on the car, but after some diagnosis this turned out to be just a simply leaky corroded valve block. So I ended up changing this and also replaced the aromatic pump whilst I was at it. Surprisingly, to this day, the car is still running on the factory air suspension struts and airbags. Now all this time I've had the car, I was driving around on the OEM TCU doing some data logging, so after a couple months of driving, I figured it was finally time to swap my Ultimate Nag TCU into the car and turn this car into my test vehicle for the TCU. Now moving to the end of October, this is when I started to tear apart the OEM infotainment system to start my car PC project. You could look at my projects playlist on YouTube to see how this has evolved from when I started it. Now moving to the end of the year, I was getting ready to take the car to Germany for my second work trip abroad to Zittau, and my alternator died. Luckily it died in the UK, so within a couple of days I had that changed to a new unit. And before you ask why I didn't just change the brushes that tend to fail, we noticed that the pulley on the alternator had play in it, so I just decided to change the whole unit. It was roughly at this time that I also started to work with one of my friends, Vlad, in order to reverse engineer how the car's cluster worked. We ended up reverse engineering the protocol on how infotainment pages on the cluster work, and again I'll touch on this later. Now in January I did my first trip abroad to Germany and met up with my friend Uncle Benz and also showed him what my TCU can do in the E55 when it's thrown into the faster shifting mode. He was quite impressed by this. Once crossing all the way to Zittau, I asked the workshop at work to do a full checkup on my car, and shockingly they found that this was what one of my brake rotors looked like. How this did not shatter on the autobahn is simply amazing, but I was really lucky that this did not happen, so we immediately changed the rear brakes. The front brakes were worn, but okay, so I decided to change them when I got back to the UK. And whilst in Germany, I finally ordered a new front plate and air boxes for the engine to restore it to its proper look. And on the way back home from Germany, I decided to take the car to its home, so here it is at the Mercedes-Benz Museum in Stuttgart. Now back in the UK, I ended up changing all the suspension arms on the front to new ones, as the old ones had play in them. After doing this, the car definitely felt a lot more nicer to drive. It was a lot more planted and also steering felt a lot less loose. I also noticed at this point that my left side exhaust manifold had a slight crack in it, but I was planning to change the exhaust manifolds at some point in the future. This crack never seemed to grow, so I thought it was stable as it was. But as you'll find out soon, oh boy, I'll be proven wrong. I ended up also 3D printing a custom badge for my engine since my badge was missing, and Mercedes-Benz UK has been leading me in circles for the past 6 months trying to chase down the correct badge. Honestly though, I like this badge a lot more than the standard one, as it's a bit more unique and shows people at car meets who I am. At this point, I was going to go to Germany again for my summer trip to work, but before doing so, I got the front section of the exhaust redone, put in new sports cats at the front to stop the car smelling, as up to this point it had been a decat. However, at my request, the exhaust shop did not touch that broken manifold yet. Now, in Germany over summer, this is when I started toying with the idea of putting a new steering wheel in my car, and this is what the prototyping phase looked like with my friend. Now, when I arrived at work in Germany, I asked the workshop to do a transmission service and also exchange the AC coolant flap, as it had frozen in the hot position, meaning that the back AC only ever got hot air regardless of the setting. The gearbox oil coming out of the car looked quite dark, but this was all changed for new fluid. At this point, it's worth mentioning that the day after this footage was filmed, I was supposed to travel to Berlin from work in order to take my car to Bitton's Berlin office in order to demo some of the features I've added to my car, like the custom transmission module and infotainment system. So I had my friend Vlad come over, and we were working to install a custom version of IC211 into my car, which he'd been working on for the past couple of months. This cluster has patch software that he has written which allows for ATF temperature to be shown on the AMG menu, and some extra features that I can command from my car's PC system. However, to this day, I'm yet to actually use any of those features he's added for me. So once we had the new cluster installed, I took Vlad for a test drive when disaster struck. Listen to this clip. So what happened is that after putting in this new transmission mount, this stressed the broken exhaust manifold just enough so that it snapped. So Vlad, myself, and some other work colleagues were stuck in the company workshop until 2 in the morning on the day I'm supposed to leave to Berlin to try to replace the manifold with the spare one I already had in the trunk ready to go into the car. However, we realised that this was the wrong manifold after spending the best part of 6 hours trying to install it. So, being completely honest, this was a low for me. I couldn't drive to Berlin to show off my car, and we were all super tired and exhausted, so I gave up on the idea of going to Berlin, which was unfortunate, but I can hopefully go there again this coming winter. So the next day, we cleaned up the snapped exhaust manifold and welded it all back together again and reinstalled it. You can see here the differences between my car's original manifold and a replacement manifold I have. The difference is subtle, but it's enough for the exhaust manifold not to fit. With the car now fully functional again, I drove to Prague to meet another YouTuber friend of mine. On the way home from Germany, I met up with Uncle Bent again and saw his beautiful Japanese import E55 AMG. Oh, and for fun, we also took my car on the Nürburgring. Now, once I landed back in the UK again, we changed the engine mounts, which desperately needed changing, and I took my car to the exhaust shop in order to reseat the exhaust so that it is no longer under such tension with the new engine and gearbox mounts. All this is good now, thankfully, and I don't have to play with it anymore. Recently, I've ended up changing my crank pulley and the worn-out supercharger belt tensioner, since both were in need of a swap quite desperately, especially if I'm to go back to the continent again. I also updated my custom badge for a much smarter one that looks way nicer in my opinion. This is also another 3D printed badge. So, this pretty much concludes my year of ownership of this car. I have to be honest, I'm really impressed with the transformation this car has undergone since I bought it. It drives beautifully, and I plan to keep this car for many years to come. At the time of writing this, the car now has 225,000 miles on it. Maybe at some point I'll dine another car and see how much power it's lost after all this time and miles. Anyway, if you're looking for something else to watch, why not check out how we retrofitted the W213 steering wheel on my 211 and get everything to function seamlessly with my custom infotainment system. Or if you want a little bit of fun, go check out me controlling Mario Kart with my car. And that's all for this video, so I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye.